The marriage died at exactly 6:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, drowned out by the hiss of roasting vegetables and the obnoxious, jazzy marimba ringtone Miles had assigned to exactly one person on this earth. Bianca was standing in the heart of the kitchen, pulling a heavy cast iron roasting pan from the oven. The house smelled of rosemary, garlic, and the quiet warmth of a family settling in for the evening, or at least the illusion of one. At the sound of that specific ringtone, Miles, who had been lazily scrolling through emails at the kitchen island, shot up off his bar stool as if he'd been electrocuted. He didn't even look at the caller ID. He didn't have to. It was Elise. In his frantic rush to grab the phone from the counter, Miles spun sharply, his broad shoulder slamming hard into Bianca's elbow. The heavy pan violently tilted. Bianca gasped as her bare forearm crashed directly against the blistering 400-degree metal of the oven rack. The sizzle of searing skin was immediate, followed by a blinding white-hot agony that radiated straight up to her collarbone. She dropped the pan onto the stovetop with a deafening clatter, instinctively grabbing her arm. Miles finally looked up, phone already pressed to his ear. He saw the red, blistering welt forming instantly on her pale skin. He saw the tears of pure shock welling in her eyes, and yet his expression barely shifted from the panicked concern he was reserving entirely for the woman on the other end of the line. "Just run it under the cold tap, Bianca," he tossed over his shoulder, already stretching his free arm into his tailored wool overcoat. "Elise's having another severe panic attack. Her heart rate is through the roof, and she can't breathe. I have to get over there." Bianca stood frozen by the sink. The cold water rushed over her burned flesh, washing away the heat, but it did absolutely nothing for the glacial, terrifying silence that suddenly settled over her heart. For 3 years, Elise, Miles's former junior associate, a 28-year-old walking crisis with a penchant for sheer blouses and weaponized fragility, had been the invisible third person in their marriage. There was always a crisis. A burst pipe in her apartment, a flat tire on the freeway, a bad breakup, and perfectly timed panic attacks that, miraculously, only Miles could talk her out of. Bianca had played the role of the cool, understanding wife for years. She had swallowed her pride, pushed down her intuition, and rationalized his behavior. She had stepped away from her own highly successful, fiercely demanding career as an interior designer to build this flawless, magazine-worthy home. She had raised their daughter, managed the finances, and acted as the unshakable foundation so Miles could soar in his corporate ascent. She had been wildly competent, and that, she realized with a sickening twist of her stomach, was exactly the problem. Miles didn't want a partner. He wanted a worshiper. He didn't just tolerate Elise's endless neediness. He craved it. It stroked his ego. It made him feel like a god to swoop in and save the damsel in distress, while his wife was too busy managing reality to stroke his vanity. And for what? So the man she had loved for a decade could tell her to run it under the tap while she literally burned in front of him. It was as if a massive, heavy switch had been flipped deep inside her chest. The desperate, exhausting need to make him see her, to make him choose his family, just vanished, evaporated into the fragrant kitchen air. She looked at his handsome face, etched with genuine anxiety for another woman, and felt nothing but a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She was done. The love didn't bleed out slowly. It didn't fade with a whimper. It shattered, cleanly and absolutely, like cheap glass dropped on a hard tile floor. She didn't scream at him. She didn't throw the roasting pan at his head or demand he stay. Women who are truly, utterly finished do not make a sound. "I won't be late," Miles lied. Not quite meeting her eyes, his hand already on the brass handle of the front door. "Don't wait up." Before he could pull the door open, the soft, rapid patter of bare feet echoed against the hardwood hallway. 6-year-old Nyla, her dark curls sleep, mussed from a late afternoon nap, padded into the foyer. She was wearing her favorite mismatched pajamas, clutching a piece of paper tightly against her small chest. "Daddy," she piped up, her little voice trembling as she took in the sight of Miles's heavy coat and the car keys in his hand. "Where are you going? You promised to do the bedtime story tonight. You promised we could read the new book." Miles let out a heavy sigh, a harsh, impatient sound of sheer inconvenience that made Bianca's unburned hand clench into a tight fist by her side. "Not tonight," Miles said, his tone clipped and rushing. "Daddy has an emergency at work, a really big one. Go back to your room, Mommy will read to you." Nyla's lower lip wobbled dangerously. Instead of retreating, she lunged forward, wrapping her small, delicate arms stubbornly around Miles's thigh. "But you promised. You haven't read to me in forever." Bianca watched from the kitchen as the man she had built a life with tried to peel their weeping daughter off his leg like she was nothing more than a nuisance delaying his real life. The burn on her arm throbbed relentlessly, raw and exposed. But Bianca's mind was sharper, clearer, and colder than it had been in years. She stepped away from the running water. She walked slowly toward the foyer, her face a mask of perfect, chilling calm, and slid her hand into the deep pocket of her linen apron. Her fingers brushed against the crisp, folded edges of a document she had quietly picked up from a very expensive lawyer's office 3 days ago. "Miles," Bianca said, her voice dropping into that soothing, frictionless register he relied on so heavily to manage his life. It was the voice of the perfect wife, the ultimate fixer. "If you really must go, then go, but don't push her." Miles paused, visibly grinding his teeth as his phone vibrated violently in his overcoat pocket. The manic energy rolling off him was suffocating. He looked down at Nyla, who was still weeping softly against his pant leg, and then up at Bianca, his eyes entirely devoid of guilt, holding only the frantic impatience of a man delayed. "I am not pushing her, Bianca. I am just in a massive hurry. Elise is completely alone and hyperventilating. Can you please handle this?" "I am handling it," Bianca replied smoothly. "Let's study the anatomy of a woman who has officially clocked out of her marriage." When Miles told her to run it under the tap while she was literally burning, Bianca didn't scream or demand an apology. Why? Because you only scream at a man when you still hope he'll change. The moment a woman gets quiet in the face of blatant disrespect is the moment she has started packing her mental bags. She didn't argue with him about Elise's panic attack because she realized Elise wasn't the problem. Miles's ego was. Bianca's sudden, chilling composure is the terrifying silence of a woman who has just authorized her own exit strategy. She stepped forward, her burned arm carefully tucked behind her back, and knelt down to gently detach her daughter's small hands from his trousers. "Come here, baby. Daddy is leaving, but before he does, he needs to do his homework." Bianca stood up, retrieved a sleek black pen from the entryway console, and pulled the folded document from her apron pocket. She slapped it down flat on the polished mahogany table. She had prepped it meticulously. On top was a brightly colored sheet of construction paper Nyla had brought home from school, covered in waxy, uneven crayon stars. Neatly paper-clipped directly beneath it was the heavy, watermarked legal stock she had acquired from the city's most ruthless family law attorney. "Sign this," Bianca said, tapping the bottom of the page with her uninjured hand. "It's the final consent form for Nyla's new school program. They need the secondary guardian's signature on file by tomorrow morning. Miles let out a sharp, aggrieved breath. A man being tortured by the mundane requirements of fatherhood, while a real crisis awaited him across town. Are you kidding me right now, Bianca? You couldn't have given this to me yesterday? You weren't home yesterday, she reminded him, her tone remarkably mild. Just sign it. Miles takes 2 seconds. Then you can run to your emergency. His phone buzzed again, a continuous, demanding vibration that seemed to short-circuit whatever minimal critical thinking skills he had left. He snatched the pen from Bianca's hand. He didn't lift the crayon, covered drawing to read the text underneath. He didn't scan the dense, single-spaced paragraphs detailing the absolute relinquishment of his paternal custody rights. This is the ultimate weaponization of domestic incompetence. For years, Miles treated the paperwork of his family's life, the school forms, the bills, the pediatrician appointments, as invisible labor beneath him. Bianca didn't have to forge a signature or hire a hitman. She simply used his own arrogant negligence against him. He signed away his entire life because he couldn't be bothered to read a document handed to him by his wife. It is poetic, brutal justice. He thought he was swatting away a pesky administrative task so he could be a hero elsewhere. Instead, he autographed his own eviction notice. He didn't notice the bold, capitalized words, irrevocable dissolution of marriage, peeking out from the top margin. He simply didn't care. To Miles, domestic paperwork was Bianca's domain. It was invisible labor, entirely beneath his pay grade. With a frustrated huff, he pressed the pen to the paper and aggressively scrawled his signature on the bottom line. It was his signature: move fast, sloppy, and supremely arrogant. "They're done," he snapped, tossing the pen onto the console where it clattered loudly. He didn't even look at Bianca. He looked down at Nyla, forcing a tight plastic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Be a good girl for Mommy." "Okay, Daddy, we'll be back tomorrow, and I'll buy you that huge strawberry cake you wanted, promise." He didn't wait for her answer. He grabbed his keys, pulled open the heavy oak door, and stepped out into the freezing November night. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing through the expansive, suddenly hollow foyer. Nyla flinched at the loud noise, fresh tears spilling over her dark eyelashes. "Daddy didn't even say goodbye properly," she whispered, her voice breaking. Bianca didn't look at the closed door. She didn't spare a single second mourning the man who had just walked out on them. Instead, she dropped to her knees, ignoring the sharp pain radiating up her burned arm, and pulled her daughter into a fierce, protective embrace. She buried her face in Nyla's soft, sweet-smelling hair, taking a deep, stabilizing breath. "It is okay, my love," Bianca murmured fiercely, kissing the little girl's wet cheek. "Daddy is just missing out on the best girl in the whole world. But you know what? We don't need him for the bedtime story. We are going to have an adventure tonight. A real one." Nyla sniffled, pulling back slightly, her big eyes wide and curious. "An adventure? Like going outside in the dark?" "Exactly like that," Bianca smiled, a genuine, radiant expression breaking through the icy composure she had held for the last 10 minutes. "Go to your room and pick out your absolute favorite toys to put in your pink backpack. Only the best ones, hurry now." Watching her daughter scamper up the carpeted stairs, temporarily distracted from the sting of her father's rejection, Bianca slowly stood up. She turned back to the mahogany console table. Her fingers, steady and precise, unclipped the crayon drawing. She tossed the colorful paper aside, revealing the immaculate legal document beneath. There, resting starkly against the crisp white page, was Miles's signature. It was legally binding, perfectly executed, and entirely his own doing. He had just signed away his house, his financial leverage, and his daughter, all because he couldn't be bothered to look away from another woman's manufactured drama. A profound, intoxicating sense of liberation washed over Bianca. The heavy, suffocating fog of her failing marriage lifted, leaving behind a skyline of pure, unadulterated clarity. She picked up her cell phone from the table, bypassing the shared family contacts, and dialed a private number she had saved under an alias 3 days ago. It was answered on the second ring. "Aviation Services, how can I assist you tonight?" A polite, professional voice inquired. Bianca stared down at her burned, blistering arm, feeling the pain not as a tragedy, but as a final, branding reminder of what she was leaving behind. "This is Bianca," she said, her voice ringing out crisp and commanding in the silent house. "I need to confirm the charter flight to the East Coast. Yes, tonight. Have the car at my gates in exactly 2 hours." The 2 hours that followed were a masterpiece of surgical extraction. Bianca didn't run around the house frantically tossing things into garbage bags. She didn't pause to weep over framed wedding photos or linger in the nursery, inhaling the scent of baby lotion. There was no room for nostalgia. She moved with the cold, precise efficiency of a bomb squad technician, dismantling a device she had built herself. She started in Miles's sprawling home office. The room was a monument to his ego, dark wood, leather, and shelves, lined with awards she had polished for him. She sat down at his sleek desktop computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Click, she logged out of the shared iCloud account, erasing her location, tracking and severing the digital umbilical cord that had tied them together. Click, she wiped the family iPad, deleting the thousands of photos that documented a happy family that hadn't existed for years. Click, she accessed their joint banking portal. With a few swift keystrokes, she transferred the entirety of her premarital trust fund, the money Miles always joked about using for a down payment on a vacation home, into a heavily guarded, private offshore account her lawyer had set up. She left enough in the joint checking to cover the month's mortgage. She wasn't a thief. She was just reclaiming her equity. Then came the physical purge. She walked into the massive custom-built walk. In closet they shared, to the left, was Miles's pristine row of tailored suits. To the right was her life, or rather, the life Miles had bought for her. She bypassed the rows of designer dresses, the silk blouses he preferred her to wear, the expensive handbags he bought her every time he missed an anniversary or a recital. She touched none of it. She pulled a single medium-sized hard-shell suitcase from the top shelf. Into it went her most basic, comfortable clothes, jeans, cashmere sweaters she had bought herself, comfortable shoes. She moved to Nyla's room. The little girl had fallen asleep on her rug, her pink backpack overstuffed with a random assortment of plastic dinosaurs and a half-eaten sleeve of graham crackers. Bianca smiled softly, kissing her daughter's forehead before gently repacking the bag. She took only the essentials: Nyla's asthma inhaler, her favorite worn-out teddy bear, missing one button eye, her warmest coat, and enough clothes for a week. Everything else, the massive dollhouses, the custom-built bed, the walls Bianca had painstakingly painted with a mural of a fairy tale forest, stayed behind. They were just things, and things could be replaced. Peace of mind could not. By 1:45 a.m., the house was perfectly, unnervingly still. The kitchen smelled faintly of the ruined roast Bianca had dumped into the garbage disposal. She stood at the kitchen island, the dim overhead pendant light casting a soft glow over the pristine marble countertop. In her left hand, she held the signed divorce and custody agreement, safely tucked inside a waterproof folder. In her right hand, she held her cell phone. The screen lit up brightly in the dark kitchen. A text message from Miles. Elise is finally asleep. It was bad, Bianca. I'm gonna crash on her couch so I can monitor her heart rate. I'll be home first thing in the morning. Don't be dramatic about this. Bianca read the words twice. A month ago, a message like that would have sent her into a spiral of agonizing self-doubt and silent tears. She would have stayed up until dawn, questioning her worth, wondering if she was being too demanding, too unsupportive. Tonight she felt absolutely nothing. The message read like a dispatch from a stranger. She didn't type out a furious reply. She didn't call him to scream. She simply pressed her thumb against her left ring finger and slowly twisted off the heavy 3-carat diamond wedding band. It slid off easily, leaving a pale, slightly indented ring of skin behind. She placed the diamond exactly in the center of the kitchen island, right next to Miles's half. Empty, cold coffee mug from that morning. It sat there, glittering coldly under the pendant light. A perfect, silent punctuation mark. At the end of a 10-year sentence, headlights swept across the front windows, casting long, moving shadows across the living room walls. The car had arrived. Bianca slipped her phone into her pocket, picked up the single suitcase, and hoisted the sleeping Nyla into her arms. The little girl mumbled incoherently, tucking her face into the crook of Bianca's neck. She walked out the front door and didn't look back. The night air was freezing, biting against her exposed, bandaged arm, but it felt incredibly clean. The driver, a discreet man in a dark suit, immediately took her bag and opened the rear door of the idling SUV. Bianca slid into the plush leather seat, securing Nyla beside her, as the car pulled smoothly out of the gated driveway, turning onto the empty suburban street. Bianca took her cell phone out of her pocket one last time. She popped the SIM tray, removed the tiny plastic card that connected her to Miles, to Elise, to the life she was incinerating, and snapped it in half. She rolled down the tinted window just a crack. As the car sped past the neighborhood's communal trash compactors, she tossed the broken pieces out into the rushing wind. "To the airfield, ma'am," the driver asked quietly, his eyes on the rearview mirror. "Yes," Bianca said, leaning her head back against the headrest, a deep, genuine smile finally touching her lips. "To the airfield, we're going home." Miles swung the front door open at precisely 8:15 a.m. the next morning, carrying a cardboard tray of overpriced artisanal coffees and a distinct sense of lingering irritation. He looked terrible, and he knew it. His tailored trousers were wrinkled from sleeping on Elise's velvet sofa, and his jaw was dark, with morning stubble. He also smelled unmistakably of gardenia perfume, a scent Elise claimed grounded her during panic attacks, and which currently clung to his wool overcoat like a stubborn ghost. He stepped into the expansive foyer and immediately braced himself for the chill. He expected Bianca to be sitting on the living room sofa, her posture rigid, ready to launch into a carefully worded, highly reasonable lecture about priorities and family time. He had his defenses already lined up in his head like toy soldiers. He would sigh, run a hand through his hair, tell her how exhausted he was, and remind her that Elise was a fragile, creative genius who needed a heavy hand to guide her. He would buy Nyla the biggest cake in the bakery window on his way home from work tonight. It would be fine. It was always fine. "Bianca, I am back," he called out, his voice echoing slightly louder than usual in the quiet house. "I brought you that oat milk latte you like." Silence. He frowned, kicking off his leather loafers by the door. "Bianca, come on, don't do the silent treatment. It's childish. You know I had to stay. If I hadn't been there to regulate her breathing, she would have ended up in the ER again." Still nothing. The house was dead quiet, not the usual quiet of Bianca reading in the sunroom or Nyla coloring upstairs. This was a vacuum, a total absence of life. The rhythmic hum of the central heating unit was the only sound breaking the stillness. Miles walked past the formal dining room and into the vast open-plan kitchen. The first thing he noticed was that it was spotless, unnaturally so. There was no smell of breakfast, no coffee brewing, no half-finished art project of Nyla's spread across the table. Then, his eyes snagged on the kitchen island. Sitting there, precisely centered on the polished white marble right next to the mug he had left behind yesterday morning, was a glittering circle of platinum and diamonds. Miles stopped dead in his tracks, the cardboard tray of coffees tilting dangerously in his hand. He stared at the wedding ring. His brain, usually so quick and analytical, suddenly felt thick and sluggish. "Okay, very dramatic," he muttered to himself, a nervous, derisive chuckle escaping his throat. He set the coffees down and picked up the ring. The metal was ice cold. "Seriously, Bianca? You are playing games with a $50,000 piece of jewelry because I helped a friend." He shoved the ring roughly into his pocket, his irritation suddenly spiking into a hot, defensive anger. He was the provider. He was the one holding this entire operation together. He didn't have time for teenage theatrics. "Bianca." He barked, his voice sharp and authoritative, designed to demand an immediate response. He marched out of the kitchen and took the stairs 2 at a time. "Where are you? This isn't funny. I have a 9 a.m. conference call and I need to shower." He pushed open the door to the master bedroom. The massive king-size bed was perfectly made, the pillows fluffed with Bianca's usual militant precision. The room smelled faintly of her lavender linen spray, but it felt hollow. He strode purposefully toward the master bathroom, fully expecting to find her aggressively organizing her makeup or taking a scalding shower. But the bathroom was empty. The steam hasn't cleared because there was no steam. The massive double vanity was pristine. Miles frowned. Something caught his eye. He stepped closer to the marble counter. His toothbrush sat in its usual ceramic holder, but the matching holder next to it was empty. Bianca's electric toothbrush was gone. Her row of expensive skincare serums, usually lined up in obsessive height order, had vanished. A cold, unfamiliar prickle of unease started at the base of his neck. He turned around and walked over to the massive walk. In closet they shared, the double doors were slightly ajar. He grabbed the handles and threw them wide open. The breath left his lungs in a single, sharp rush. To his left, his own side of the closet was untouched. Rows of suits, neatly aligned ties, perfectly polished dress shoes. But the entire right side of the closet, Bianca's side, was a gaping, terrifying void. The long rows where her dresses used to hang were now just bare, wooden hangers dangling uselessly on the metal rod. The shelves that held her carefully curated handbag collection were empty. The shoe racks were stripped bare. It wasn't just a weekend bag's worth of clothes missing. It was a complete surgical erasure. It looked as though she had never existed in this space at all. "What the hell?" Miles whispered, the anger draining out of him instantly, replaced by a sudden, sickening vertigo. He stumbled backward, his hand blindly grabbing the edge of the doorframe for support. The silence of the house suddenly didn't feel like a tantrum. It felt like a tomb. He spun around and sprinted down the hallway to Nyla's room. He threw the door open so hard it bounced off the drywall. The room was neat, too neat. The bed was made. But the pink backpack that usually sat at the foot of her bed was gone. Her favorite pair of tiny scuffed sneakers were missing from the closet floor. The stuffed teddy bear that she refused to sleep without, the one with the missing button eye that Miles constantly threatened to throw away, was nowhere to be seen. Miles stood in the center of his daughter's painfully quiet room. the scent of Elise's gardenia perfume, suddenly smelling sickly sweet, like rotting flowers in his own nose. The carefully constructed narrative in his head, the one where he was the indispensable hero, balancing a demanding wife and a fragile genius, shattered into 1,000 pieces. They weren't hiding. They weren't throwing a tantrum. They were gone. Panic is a physical sensation. Miles didn't just feel it in his mind. He felt it vibrating in his teeth, souring the taste in his mouth, tightening around his lungs until every breath felt like pulling air through a cocktail straw. He lunged for his pockets, his fingers fumbling awkwardly over the cold metal of Bianca's wedding ring before finding his phone. He dialed her number, his thumb pressing the screen so hard it almost cracked. He brought the phone to his ear, pacing the empty hallway, waiting for the familiar, steady ringtone, waiting for her calm voice to answer, to tell him this was a joke, a terrible, elaborate lesson to teach him a point. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again. The robotic female voice delivered the message with a cheerful indifference that made Miles's stomach violently pitch. "No, no, no," he muttered, dropping the phone from his ear and staring at the screen. He hit redial, the same immediate mechanical rejection. He swiped through his contacts with a trembling thumb, searching for Sarah, Bianca's fiercely loyal, razor-tongued best friend. Sarah had never liked him, viewing his mentorship of Elise with open, mocking hostility. If anyone knew where Bianca had gone, it was her. He hit call. It rang twice before Sarah picked up. Sarah. Miles choked out, the word tumbling from his mouth before she could even speak. Where is she? Where did Bianca go? Her phone is disconnected. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice wasn't angry or surprised. It was terrifyingly calm, steeped in a deep, profound disgust. "She went exactly where you pushed her, Miles," Sarah said, the ice in her tone sharp enough to cut glass away. "Stop the riddles," Miles snapped, the terror clawing at his throat, morphing briefly back into his default arrogance. "Where are my wife and daughter? I need to speak to her right now. This is insane." "Your ex-wife," Sarah corrected smoothly, "and you have nothing to say to her that she hasn't already heard 1,000 times before. Usually while you were on your way out the door to hold Elise's hand through another imaginary crisis." "You don't understand," Miles pleaded, his voice cracking, the arrogance crumbling instantly. "The house is empty. She took her things. She left her ring. She took Nyla. Where are they?" "She took what belongs to her," Sarah replied, devoid of any sympathy, "and left you what belongs to you. An empty house and a needy 28-year-old assistant. Congratulations, Miles. You finally got everything you spent the last 3 years asking for. Don't ever call this number again." Click. The line went dead. Miles stared at his phone, the blood roaring in his ears so loudly it sounded like ocean surf. He was hyperventilating now, the kind of genuine, agonizing panic attack Elise had spent years faking. He stumbled out of Nyla's room, practically falling down the stairs, catching himself on the heavy banister. He sprinted toward his home office, the only room he hadn't checked. Maybe she left a note. Maybe she left an itinerary, a list of demands, something, anything to prove she hadn't just vaporized. He burst into the dark wood-paneled room. The desk was meticulously clean, as always, but right in the center of the massive leather blotter, directly under the soft beam of his desk lamp, lay a single, neatly stacked pile of thick, watermarked paper. Miles approached the desk like a man walking toward an unexploded bomb. He leaned over, his hands gripping the edge of the mahogany wood so tightly, his knuckles turned stark white. It wasn't a handwritten letter. It wasn't a list of grievances. It was a legal document. The bold, capitalized letters at the top of the page seemed to burn into his retinas. Irrevocable petition for dissolution of marriage and relinquishment of all parental custody rights. His eyes darted frantically down the page, skimming past the brutal, airtight legal jargon detailing the division of assets, the transfer of her personal trust funds, the absolute waiving of spousal support in exchange for sole, uncontested physical and legal custody of Nyla. His gaze finally hit the bottom of the last page. There, resting starkly above the printed line, Miles Hayes' consenting party, was his own signature, fast, sloppy, and undeniably authentic. The exact signature he had hastily scrawled last night, annoyed that his daughter's school permission slip was delaying his rescue mission across town. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow to the chest. She hadn't just packed a bag, she had orchestrated an execution. While he was soothing Elise's imaginary ailments, Bianca had calmly handed him the legal instrument of his own destruction. And he had signed it without blinking an eye. He had thrown away his wife, his child, and his family, all to shave 30 seconds off his departure time. Miles's knees buckled. He collapsed backward into his heavy leather desk chair, the breath tearing out of his throat in a jagged, ugly sob. His phone suddenly buzzed on the desk, vibrating violently against the wood. Miles scrambled for it, a desperate, pathetic hope flaring in his chest that Bianca had changed her mind, that the plane had turned around, that she was calling to say it was all a bad dream. He grabbed the phone. The caller ID flashed brightly. Elise Urgent. Miles stared at the name that had dictated his schedule, drained his energy, and stroked his ego for 3 years. The name that had cost him everything that actually mattered. The phone vibrated again, and again demanding his attention, demanding he play the savior. With a guttural roar of pure, unadulterated self-loathing, Miles hurled the phone across the room. It smashed into the solid oak bookshelf, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of dead, black glass before it hit the floor, finally, blissfully silent. 6 weeks later, the house didn't just feel empty. It felt actively hostile. The thermostat was broken, but Miles hadn't bothered to call a repairman. He lived in the suffocating quiet, surviving on black coffee, cheap takeout, and the punishing loop of his own memories. The pristine surfaces Bianca used to maintain so effortlessly were now coated in a fine layer of gray dust. He was sitting on the edge of the living room sofa, staring blankly at the blank television screen when the front doorbell chimed. It wasn't the jazzy marimba ringtone. He had smashed that phone to pieces. But the harsh, brassy chime of the front door. Miles dragged himself up, his clothes rumpled, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. He pulled open the heavy oak door. Elise stood on the porch, shivering in a thin, impractical silk trench coat. Her eyes were wide and brimming with meticulously calibrated tears. "Miles," she gasped, stepping forward, as if to collapse against his chest. "I've been so worried. You haven't answered any of my emails. My chest is so tight. I haven't slept in days. I think I am having another episode." Miles didn't step back to let her in. He stood squarely in the doorway, blocking her path. He looked at her. He truly looked at her for the first time without the protective, invisible buffer of his wife holding his actual life together. Without Bianca managing his home, his meals, and his child, the illusion of his own grandeur had evaporated. Standing before him wasn't a fragile, misunderstood genius who needed his brilliant guidance. She was an emotional vampire, a bottomless pit of manufactured need, and she suddenly smelled nauseatingly of cheap gardenia perfume and desperation. Elise faltered, her hands dropping to her sides as she took in his dead, glacial stare. "What is wrong? You are scaring me." "Save the performance, Elise," Miles said, his voice raspy, stripped of all its former warmth and arrogance. The audience left. Elise blinked, a flash of genuine confusion crossing her face before she quickly defaulted to victimhood. "How can you be so cruel? I need you. You're the only one who can calm my heart rate down." "Go to a doctor," Miles replied, his tone so flat, so profoundly indifferent, it made her flinch. "Take a pill, call a therapist. I don't care." "But you cost me my wife," Miles interrupted, his voice finally rising, the suppressed agony of the last 6 weeks cracking through his stoic facade. "I signed away my 6-year-old daughter because I was too busy indulging your pathetic, endless need for attention. I traded my family for a girl who fakes hyperventilation to get a man to buy her dinner." Oh, the delicious irony of the delayed epiphany. Miles finally sees Elise not as a fragile genius, but as an emotional vampire. But let's be explicitly clear. Elise didn't cost Miles his wife. Miles cost Miles his wife. He used Elise's manufactured drama as a cheap ego boost, because being a husband and father required actual emotional labor, whereas being Elise's savior only required answering his phone. Blaming the mistress, or the work wife, is the last refuge of a coward. He didn't slay the dragon. He just realized he was the one who handed the dragon a match. Elise's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. The sweet, helpless facade vanished, replaced by a sharp, ugly indignation. "You can't blame me for your failing marriage. She obviously didn't love you enough to get off my porch," Miles snarled, his eyes dark and lethal. "Get off my property. And if you ever contact me again, I will have security physically remove you from the building. We are done." He didn't wait to see her reaction. He slammed the heavy oak door in her face, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. He stood in the foyer, his chest heaving, waiting for the satisfaction of cutting her out of his life to wash over him, waiting for the victory. But there was no victory. It was a hollow, useless triumph. Slaying the dragon meant nothing when the castle was already burned to the ground. Miles dragged himself back to the living room and collapsed onto the floor, his back resting against the base of the sofa. He buried his face in his hands, pressing his palms into his eyes until he saw stars. As he shifted his weight, his hand brushed against something wedged deep underneath the sofa. He paused, blindly reaching into the dark crevice. His fingers closed around a small, waxy cylinder. He pulled it out into the pale winter sunlight filtering through the window. It was a pink crayon snapped in half. The paper wrapper was peeled back, bearing the tiny crescent moon indentations of Nyla's fingernails. Miles's breath hitched. He carefully placed the broken crayon on the palm of his hand as if it were a priceless artifact. He leaned forward to look under the sofa to see if anything else had rolled beneath it. His hand hit a soft, woven canvas tote bag, tucked discreetly out of sight. He pulled the bag out. Inside, resting on a bed of tissue paper, was a bundle of the softest, most luxurious gray cashmere yarn. Protruding from the yarn were 2 wooden knitting needles. It was a scarf. It was halfway finished, the stitchwork tight, even, and flawless. Pinned to the edge of the cashmere was a small, cream-colored gift tag written in Bianca's elegant, sweeping cursive. To keep you warm when you're working late. Happy anniversary, my love. Bianca, she had been making it for him. While he was out playing savior to another woman, while he was ignoring her calls, while he was dismissing her pain, she had been sitting on this very sofa, quietly weaving her love into something to keep him warm. The dam broke. The arrogant, untouchable Miles Hayes, finally, completely shattered. He pulled the soft, unfinished cashmere to his face, inhaling the faint, lingering scent of lavender and home, and began to weep. The sobs tore out of his throat, raw, ugly, and echoing endlessly through the empty rooms. 2,000 miles away, the southern sun was bright, warm, and unapologetic. Bianca stood on the wooden deck of a beachfront cafe, the salty ocean breeze whipping her loose, dark hair around her shoulders. She was wearing a simple, flowing white sundress, her bare feet resting comfortably in stylish leather sandals. She held a ceramic mug of hot coffee, which she was actually getting to drink while it was hot. She looked down at her forearm. The burn had healed into a smooth, pale scar. It didn't hurt anymore. It was just a mark of a fire she had walked through and survived. "Mommy, look!" Bianca looked up, her face breaking into a radiant, breathtaking smile. Down on the pristine white sand, Nyla was running at top speed, chasing a flock of seagulls toward the crashing turquoise waves. She was wearing a bright yellow bathing suit, her dark curls bouncing freely in the wind. A half-melted strawberry ice cream cone clutched victoriously in her hand. She wasn't begging for attention. She wasn't crying over broken promises. She was just a child, utterly safe and entirely loved. Bianca took a deep breath of the clean ocean air, feeling the warm sun on her face. She pulled her phone from her pocket. She had a meeting in an hour with a local architectural firm that had seen her old portfolio and practically begged her to consult on a new boutique hotel project. Her life was hers again. The dead weight had been cut loose. She smiled at her daughter, raised her coffee mug to the brilliant blue sky, and walked down the wooden stairs toward the beach, stepping effortlessly into the light. Let's pour a glass of something robust and discuss the savior complex siphoning. The betrayal in this story isn't a traditional affair. It's a resource drain. Miles wasn't necessarily sleeping with Elise. He was giving her the emotional bandwidth, the patience, and the urgency that rightfully belonged to his wife and child. He wanted the pristine house and the perfectly managed daughter that Bianca provided. But he wanted the ego-stroking adoration that Elise traded for his attention. Bianca's revenge is a masterclass in elegant amputation. She didn't fight for a man who needed a crisis to feel important. She recognized that her extreme competence had inadvertently enabled his extreme negligence. So what did she do? She simply stopped holding his life together. She removed herself from the equation and let his world collapse under the weight of his own choices. The greatest tragedy for a narcissist isn't being yelled at, it is being irrelevant. By the time Miles found the unfinished cashmere scarf, he realized he hadn't just lost a wife, he had lost the only person who was actually building a life with him, while he was busy playing a bit part in someone else's drama. So here's my question for you tonight. Have you ever been the competent partner who managed reality while your significant other played hero to someone else? And if you had the relinquishment of custody form hidden under a crayon drawing, would you have the nerve to ask him to sign it? Tell me your exit strategies in the comments. I am reading. Madam, read out.